But first, let's go through some of the big stories of the day with a man who knows all about big stories. He is the Spectator's deputy political editor, James Hill. Morning, James.
Morning, Kevin.
Well, look, first of all, there's a big story in The Sun that I think bears examination. There's a charity called Migrant Help. Incredibly, they get they're in the midst of a £385 million 10-year contract to help migrants. They run an advice line for the Home Office. So essentially, the important thing about this charity is taxpayers essentially fund it. Now, they've branched out now. They're going on a sort of nationwide tour of schools into the classrooms to, and I quote, challenge the mindset of pupils who will, among other things, be shown kind of a theatrical recreation of what it's like to suddenly have to leave your fly-blown home in Syria in 5 minutes because the forces of evil are descending upon you, and if you don't run, you will be consumed by war and torture. So you can see what we're getting at here. This is brainwashing kids. The Migrant Help defended its spending decisions, arguing this is the school workshop. The workshops are educational, not political. The Home Office said this contract was agreed under the previous government, always the previous government, isn't it? All contracts are subject to review to ensure they continue to deliver value. Well, at the moment, we're spending £385 million on a charity that's going around classrooms trying to brainwash the kids into thinking positively about asylum seekers. I don't think taxpayers will be that keen on that method of getting through their money, would you?
No, and I think that it smacks of what was previously called sock puppetry, which is when one arm of government effectively lobbies the other arm for more money. And of course, who picks up the tab? It's the taxpayer. And of course, the costs of putting people who are coming here in hotels, etc., was revealed yesterday to have cost $15 billion. Now it turns out this contract suggests they're spending up to $300 million on educating people in our country on this. And it's just something, I think, which will have the Home Office having its head in its hands, because it goes completely against the government's messaging on this. And of course, it just comes as a great waste and largesse at a time when the public services are crumbling.
Indeed. I mean, and still with the asylum seeker problem, the crisis, if you like. I mean, it's on the front page of the Times today, but it's yet another announcement by this government. We're going to stop putting migrants into hotels, often 4-star hotels. And we're going to now start billeting them in disused military barracks, disused holiday camps and the like. They've named one in Scotland, one in Sussex. But is it just me, or is that announcement on a repeat loop? Because they seem to say it every single damn week. They say it all the time. I mean, there are two things to say about it. First of all, 2 military bases or former military bases won't be anything like big enough to handle the number of migrants coming across. They'll still have to use hotels. And the second thing I'd like to say, let me know what you think, James, is you know, this government obsesses on where we're putting these migrants. It seems to think that by announcing to us we're going to stop using these expensive hotels and we're going to put them into military barracks. Well, okay, I'm not entirely against that. It saves some money. But they seem to miss the point. They think that when we receive this information, they are so worried about the migrant crisis, the asylum seeker crisis, but it's okay now because they won't be putting them in hotels. They'll put them into military barracks. That isn't at the heart of the matter, is it? What we'd like to see is some kind of credible plan to stop them keep coming.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think that's the main thing that people were saying in Labour after the comprehensive spending review, where they said, oh, well, Rachel Reeves wants to get rid of these hotels. No, the point is they don't want the people here in the first place, as you say, Kevin. So it's the key point where you actually store these people. And the second thing as well, Kevin, is that we've also seen these stories come and go for many years. I'm very sceptical of this because, like you, I've been covering this issue for 4 or 5 years now. And of course, they were in the army barracks, and they were moved to the hotels, they were put on the boats, and that's the whole merry-go-round. The whole game of whack-a-mole repeats itself endlessly. And there are always problems. We'll always get involved, and I will be very sceptical. I will wait to see if it actually happens. I don't think it will, to be frank.
Also, James, we know, while they keep saying we're going to reduce the use of hotels and by 2029 we won't be using any at all,
Yes.
We know they're commandeering new ones to use as we speak. And I think that the sort of postcard of this kind of falsity, really, this kind of false narrative that the government are trying to put up, no more hotels, instead barracks and disused holiday camps, etc., etc. The postcard for this deception was, of course, the Bell Hotel in Epping, where the local people, sick and tired of these migrants, these asylum seekers in their midst, including, of course, the now very famous Hadush Kabatu, the Ethiopian sex offender who sexually assaulted 2 local women, one of them just a 14-year-old girl. They took the government to court to close this down. And they won. They won the case in the High Court. And what did this government do? This government that doesn't want to use asylum seeker hotels anymore? It appealed so that it could carry on using the Bell Hotel to put asylum seekers in. So there you have it. Oh, we don't want to use asylum seeker hotels. Oh my God, these people have managed to close one down. Let's appeal. Let's get that damn thing open again. Do you see what I mean? I think they're deceiving us.
Well, yeah, and if you read the arguments put forward by the Home Office in that case, they kind of make a mockery of elements of what they've been claiming publicly as well. I mean, it was all the sense that we need to put them in here because otherwise the whole chain of process will unravel. And of course, the Court of Appeal couldn't go fast enough to try and reverse the lower court's decision on this matter. I think that when it comes to putting these people, there are just simply not enough barracks. I mean, I think that we're talking the tens of thousands of people who are over here. So whether they actually hit their target in 2028, or if it means they have to rush them into some purpose-built accommodation, presumably at some private contractor at God knows what expense, I just can't see them making any attempt, given, as you say, Kevin, the pressures are so overwhelming, and the fact they've won this court verdict to keep going into hotels in the first place.
Well, of course, Keir Starmer yesterday, he was in Turkey. I mean, does this guy ever get off aeroplanes? I don't know. God knows what he was doing in Turkey, but there he was giving this interview about the asylum seeker crisis. Of course, as always, blaming the Tories. It's the previous government's fault. This syndrome of Labour blaming everything on the previous Tory administration is getting embarrassing, to be honest with you. It's like they're like sort of joke parrots, just pull their string and they'll blame the Tories. Yesterday we got a very egregious example of this syndrome when the joke Justice Secretary David Lammy in Parliament talking about Hadush Kabatu, our friend, the Ethiopian sex offender who was mistakenly let out of Chelmsford Jail last Friday in an absolute comical fiasco. This was, of course, James, you won't be surprised to hear, him getting out, him being accidentally released, it was the Tories' fault. Have a look at old Lammy.
Violence went up in our prisons. Self-harm went up in our prisons. Drug abuse went up in our prisons. And prison officer numbers were cut under his watch. And he comes here and has the brass neck to give the impression that this started just 14 months ago. Let me just pause there. William Fernandez was released in error in March 2021. He was a sexual predator. He raped a 16-year-old and sexually assaulted another young woman after he was let out by prison in 2021. Was there an independent investigation? No, not from their side.
Well, it's getting very heated there, isn't he? He's not quite mentioning that while the Tories have been, while the Labour government have been in power over the past year, 262 prisoners were mistakenly released. 262. We don't know how many were asylum seekers, but I bet you there were quite a few. So there were quite a few other Hadush Kabatu's in the frame here. But, you know, I mean, I can't quite believe that David Lammy, when confronted by his opposite number, the shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick, about how did this happen? How did this guy, how come he was let out? How come 5 times he tried to get back into the jail and the prison officers wouldn't let him? And in the end, angrily directed him to the station and said, well, for God's sake, will you get the hell out of here? All of this comedy of errors. I can't quite believe that Lammy expects us to accept, to believe him when he stands up and says, well, I'll tell you why this happened. I'll tell you who was to blame. It was the Tories. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think there's 2 different issues here, one of which was sort of Labour pretended that all they had to do was get into power, get rid of those evil, wicked Tories and wave a magic wand, and suddenly the levers of the state would respond and everything would go back to the way it should be. And of course, that was a completely false impression, which they were happy to paint through many, many years in opposition. The second point to note, of course, is that this rhetoric about, oh, we can't fix it, it's as bad as the Tories, that simply plays into Nigel Farage's hands. I think the public will think, they'll look at that and they'll think, hang on a sec, if you're saying you're impotent and bad as each other, why don't we say, you know, plague on both your houses, get rid of you, and vote for someone else for reform? Because I think that's the issue here, is that although I think Lammy actually is correct to point out that the prison service did get worse under the Conservatives, you know, what are they doing to fix it? And actually taking some responsibility is, I think, one way to actually bolster your standing with the public, because otherwise they'll just say, if you can't fix this, we voted for change. That was the one word you stood on last year. We're going to vote it for proper change next time and get rid of the whole Labour Party.
Exactly right. And while we're still on this topic, Jenrick was casting doubt on Labour's pledge to get Kabatu out of the country, get him deported. Now, that has been watered down from, I believe it was over the weekend, they said it'll be today, Tuesday. Well, that was then watered down to within a week, and it's now as soon as possible. So there are 2 questions here. I wonder if Labour is able to get rid of this guy at all. He's probably right now being assailed by human rights lawyers left, right and centre who will fight his case to stay. So I wonder how quickly they can actually get rid of this guy. But secondly, I think the bigger point, and what James is, and we're getting lots and lots of calls and texts here at Talk about this from our audience saying, well, hang on a second, if this Labour government is able to take this one guy, Hadush Kabatu, and at a stroke say, right, he's on the next plane back to Ethiopia, he is getting deported. Everyone's saying, well, what about the other 10,000 foreign prisoners in our jails? Why can't we deport them?
Well, that's going to be the argument many people make, certainly. I think that to note 2 things, one of which is, and maybe due to his individual circumstances in terms of the agreements we have with Ethiopia as opposed to other countries. The second point, of course, is that the state only acts sometimes when it's had a kick up the backside. And I think that given the public outrage, of course, now maybe the wheels of justice will turn quicker. But I think you're right, Kevin, which is that you know, people will ask why more of this can't be done. I think that it's obviously very complex issues we're dealing with, but the impetus ought to be there. And I do think sometimes there is a sense, as we saw with the report that came out last week about the Home Office, too many in government simply throw up their hands and say, oh, it's the way of the world, we can't solve things. And I mean, with that defeatism, that cynicism, I think can be corrosive to trying to get some of these stuff done, particularly given foreign rapists, which Labour ought to realise is one of the most sort of electorally explosive issues here, and that this guy will not be the last, certainly, and there'll be many more cases, sadly, on current trends over the next 4 years will be released accidentally. Yeah,
I think foreign rapists are not popular, and perhaps the government should try and get rid of as many of them as possible. Let's move on. Lastly, James, I want to talk about Nigel Farage held yesterday what I thought was a rather successful press conference, flanked by a girl who's become a bit of a friend of mine. She's been a guest on my show quite often, Ellie Reynolds from Barrow, Inverness, a very eloquent, charming grooming gang victim up in Barrow, Inverness. So they focused on the rape gang inquiry that never was, isn't happening, and the way it's going never will be. Not only did they talk about how the government is letting down the nation, letting down the victims by not getting to grips with actually starting this inquiry, but they also talked about how Sadiq Khan in London in particular seems to be denying that we have a problem. Nigel Farage said London, may well be the last ungreat haven of grooming gangs going undetected. Let's have a little look at what he had to say.
Initially, I looked upon it all with a degree of disbelief. Surely nothing as large as this, nothing as appalling as this, could have happened on this scale without it breaking as a massive public story beforehand. And by 2014, this was a national issue, one that had led to great anger in our country and much of the rest of the world looking on in absolute horror. They simply couldn't fathom that something like this had happened in the United Kingdom. And yet ever since then, there have been a few inquiries, but very little has happened. This is a stain on our country in every way. It's one of the worst things, I think, that has ever happened.
I think he's got a point. They estimate, James, there could be as many as 250,000 victims, mostly vulnerable young white girls, many of them underage. And of course, the perpetrators of this horror, this national scandal, were rape gangs primarily comprised of Muslim men of Pakistani heritage. And it is for this reason that people like Ellie Reynolds, they say the government's trying to get away from focusing on that because they don't like the idea of pointing at that ethnicity because they like to encourage the Muslim vote, etc., etc., etc. So the victim girls, 4 of them resigned from the inquiry last week, saying this is a cover-up. That's what Ellie says. He says this isn't an inquiry. This is an attempt at a cover-up. Nigel Farage saying Labour is letting the nation down. I mean, people could say, oh, you're cashing in, you're making a political issue of this. Well, I think it's the responsible thing of any opposition party to do, because quite palpably Labour is letting the nation down and letting the victims down by dragging their heels on this inquiry. They can't even find someone to chair it. They're now saying that they don't think they can start it until next year. And Ellie Reynolds and the other girls say that they're pretty convinced that basically Keir Starmer doesn't want this ever to start because it will be embarrassing for his government.
Well, I think it was Churchill who said that criticism is like pain in the body. It draws attention to a state of maladjusted affairs, and certainly with this press conference yesterday, that's what Nigel Farage was trying to do, pointing to the issues in terms of the inquiry process. These are long-standing, of course, and go way back in terms of things like the infected blood inquiry, the COVID inquiry, post office, etc. But I think in the case of these rape gang victims, those who've been groomed and worse, I think that it's very clear that people want to see justice done because it's been dragged on for many, many years. I think in terms of some of his criticisms were certainly valid. He talked about child abuse with a real degree of dignity, I think, in terms of his comments. But I think, clearly you look at the demographics, you look at how the vastness of London, 10 million people, it would almost seem statistically improbable for there not to be something like a rape gang scandal having on in this capital. And the Express last week reported on 7 different cases of people coming forward with their stories. I suspect that if resources were put into this, many more cases may sadly be uncovered. So I'm sure this will be an issue of concern to Farage and reform going forward. Ellie Reynolds, as you say there, Kevin, spoke very eloquently. And these women have a voice, and they are determined to use their voice to ensure justice for the many other girls who never got that in the first place.
And the Met Police now revealing that they're investigating potentially 9,000 historical cases of sexual abuse by rape gangs. So Sadiq Khan maintaining, pretending that we don't have a problem here in the capital, that is becoming untenable. He needs to get real about this. He really does. James, excellent to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time. James Hill there, the brilliant deputy political editor of The Spectator.